Folks, let me tell you a little bit about Dean. He's an expert in organizations. He facilitates transformation processes and he coaches executives on organizational and internal political issues. Dean is one of the original proponents of the business within a business paradigm, where every manager thinks and acts like an entrepreneur who runs a small business that's funded, that you budgeted, to produce products and services for customers inside the organization and beyond. So, in the context that we're going to be talking about, a strategic planner is no different than any other manager or leader who wants to implement some game-changing initiative. Who has the problem? Dean, what do you think of the problem that we're tackling today?
Well, and beyond that, a strategic planner has to go beyond coming up with great ideas. Those ideas have to turn into initiatives that get executed to deliver results. So I think the problem we're facing is not a lack of great ideas. I think there are risks to strategy execution. Typically, these grand BHAGs are established at the top, but the rest of us don't really understand them and don't understand our role within them. And we're not necessarily aligned with them. And so that puts execution at risk. And meanwhile, with all the thinking done at the top, we're wasting a lot of bright minds, people who may have really creative ideas about how to contribute to the future of the firm. So who knows what opportunities we're missing. That's part of the problem that we'll never fully appreciate. Meanwhile, there's a bottleneck at the top. If all the strategic thinking is done at the top, Francis, well, we're going to lose agility. Something urgent happens and we've got to wait in line at the door of the top executives before we can do anything. It's going to slow the whole firm down and make us less agile. And how does that feel? How does it feel to be in that kind of organization? People are disengaged. This is where quiet quitting comes from. And you're going to lose great talent. We're certainly not cultivating the next generation of leaders. So there are many implications to what's going on with this strategy disconnect, both in terms of the success of the firm and in terms of talent.
I got to tell you, as strategic planners, right? There's some listening who are going, that's not our job. Our job is to do exactly what you said we do and then don't do, which is to come up with the good ideas and leave them for magic and kismet to happen, for them to be adopted by regular people, or we like to think about great ideas and great aspirations and leave the implementation messy stuff and even the idea of whether or not the ideas could be adapted to other people. But what you're already starting to say is that there's a huge shortcoming in that way of thinking. Although we might like it because we like ideas, that way of thinking by itself is a problem, because when staff isn't empowered, then even our grandest goals don't turn them on, they don't get inspired, our strategies fail, the projects don't work out. And furthermore, those who make strategy like we do, and the executives that we work with, we get nervous about making commitments because we don't know how to engage staff and we'd rather not think about it. So what would you think would happen to us if we kept that frame of mind?
It's very myopic, isn't it? I don't think that's entirely true. I don't think that people are saying, look, I came up with all the great ideas there, I'm done, and I can just wash my hands and move on. Because, people need a sense of purpose. And purpose means the feeling that you're engaging your unique talents to do something hard that has value to others. And if all you do is come up with ideas that don't get implemented, what is the value of your work? You're wasting your time, you're wasting your career. You want to be a driver of change in the nature of the business to achieve strategic goals. So I think strategy execution is very much of concern to strategic planners. And in fact, if I could go a little further, Francis, I would suggest there are 4 types of strategy. And the one you're used to thinking about in your community of strategists is business strategy, which means where do we want the business to be? What businesses do we want to be in the future? But there's another type of strategy, and that is competencies. What competencies do we need in this company to achieve not only our current strategies, but unknown future strategies? Now, competencies take more time to build. So business strategy has to be highly agile in this VUCA world. But competency strategies are longer term. And then number 3, talent strategy. And number 4, organizational strategy. All of those 2, 3, and 4 kinds of strategies are what make or break business strategies. So I would argue that it is within the scope of strategic planners to consider all four types of strategy, not just the usual business strategy.
Yeah, I think the failure on many strategists' part is that the three strategies that you just developed, you just distinguished, are
Mm.
given like 5 minutes at the end. When somebody
Yeah.
brings it up, I say, "Okay, we don't have time for that, do we?" Because it's not the part that we are comfortable with. It's the part that's
Yeah.
it feels harder, it feels messier, it feels more unpredictable, and it's not our forte. It's so we don't give it the kind of air that it deserves, and we certainly don't look to develop expertise in these particular areas. Which is why I really wanted to talk to you today, because your expertise in
Mm.
this area matches the part that we don't like to talk or think or work on the most.
Well, it's
That makes
true.
sense.
It would be a new competency to explore for strategic planners, but a critically important one. And on one
Mm-hmm.
hand, you've got a situation where you come up with great ideas on business strategy and organization gets in the way, so your work is futile. Or on the other hand, you have the reward of focusing on organizational strategy and building an organization that can not only execute today's strategies brilliantly, but invent tomorrow's strategies with
Mm-hmm.
agility. I would
Mm-hmm.
argue that organizational strategy is foundational to the success of business strategy and is
Mm-hmm.
in many ways more interesting. More interesting in that the question is not what's a good strategy, but rather
Mm-hmm.
how do we design an organization that answers that question, what's a good strategy, now and
Mm-hmm.
forevermore.
What you're saying, it makes perfect sense, and I hope our listeners or our audience are I hope everybody hears this video, because we can't come from this conference without adding to our own capacity to do exactly what you just described. And also know that when we spoke before, you talked about the need to have a new organizational paradigm.
Hmm.
What's the paradigm that you suggest that as change makers, as change agents at this higher level, that we need to have, even if we're sitting in a retreat coming up with these brilliant ideas, supposedly brilliant ideas, that I suspect your paradigm would change the way we think about our ideas. So tell me
Well,
if I'm wrong.
just as business strategy begins with a vision of the end state, where do we want to
Hmm.
be as a business?
Hmm.
Organizational strategy is the same thing. It begins with a vision of a very different organizational paradigm, one that empowers everybody to engage in contributing to strategy and inventing strategies of the future.
Hmm.
And then, just like business strategy translates those long term goals into near term initiatives, organizational strategy translates that vision of the end state organization into transformational initiative. Francis, can I tell you a little more about that end state, a vision of that very different kind of empowered organization?
The post transformation end state.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So imagine this. Imagine a business where every box on the organization chart is by definition a business within a business. And everyone is an entrepreneur running that little business, whether your customers are your peers within the department or within the broader enterprise or beyond customers outside of the enterprise. Everyone is an entrepreneur. So now let's agree that top executives can state strategic goals. Those are the long-term goals of where we want the business to end up in 3, 5, 10 years. But everybody is a creative entrepreneur. Everybody should be able to suggest initiatives to get us from here to there.
Hmm.
And once initiatives are defined and agreed to, everybody can go on to suggest exactly how their little business within a business can contribute to those strategic initiatives.
Hmm.
Of course, we need to look at the resource governance processes. Enterprise planning and budgeting should prioritize and fund those initiatives. Too often, the budget is barely enough just to keep what we got running, to keep the lights on, as the saying goes. There's got to be
Hmm.
really explicit funding for those strategic initiatives. Now, some businesses within a business are, by definition, going to be the prime contractors, the ones whose job it is in total to implement an initiative. But just like when you build a house, there's a general contractor who hires the electrician and the plumber and so on. Those prime contractors who are accountable for implementing a strategic initiative need help from people throughout the rest of the organization. So the first thing a prime contractor does when taking on a new initiative is line up their subcontractors, that by which I mean other groups within the company who can contribute to that initiative. And that's how teams form in this entrepreneurial world, through subcontracting for support services or components that are needed to implement the initiative. Now, of course, that's only going to work if everybody's priorities are aligned, right? So we have to set priorities at the enterprise level. You can't allow each manager to set priorities for his or her own group. Priorities are set by your customers, not yourself, not your just. I mean, when you go to the grocery store, you prioritize what you want to buy, not the store manager. So the resource governance processes set priorities for the whole enterprise and fund these initiatives, not just the prime contractor, but the prime and all the subcontractors. And in that way, everybody has the resources to deliver on those initiatives. And meanwhile, every entrepreneur is accountable for strategy, for business strategy, for their own little business within a business. They're all accountable for keeping their own little business within a business competitive, innovative, and effective at reliable delivery. So you got two levels of strategy going. You have enterprise strategy, prime and all the subs, funding, alliance initiatives. Meanwhile, everybody is the best entrepreneur you can imagine, looking after their own local business strategies. What do you think?
It sounds great, but who's the champion of the business within a business concept throughout the organization? Is it the CEO? Is it HR? Is it, because it's not a simple concept that you just invent in the fly, in the last 5 minutes of a retreat. This concept requires some work. Who's the owner of it normally, or typically, or ideally?
There are two possibilities. One possibility is the CEO with the help of an internal line of business called organizational effectiveness. That is not HR. HR looks after the employment relationship and talent issues. Organizational effectiveness looks after the ecosystem that we work in. It's more of a systems design function, not a talent function. So sometimes it's CEO plus organizational effectiveness. In other cases, it could be a department leader, like a CIO, or a chief HR officer, or any business unit leader. And in which case they'll build that vision within their part of the enterprise. But it is really the person accountable for running a great organization who should be coalescing a leadership team around a vision and a transformation roadmap to get there.
Yeah. I'm imagining this person has a complex set of skills that they don't just try to develop on the fly, but they spent years or some time before the meeting honing, because once you start talking about optimizing or developing an organization, it's not just a matter of moving around the boxes on a piece of paper, right?
Oh, for sure. That's right. Typically, that's not done by the C-level executive, but by organizational effectiveness. That is their profession, the design of the ecosystem within which we work. And let me tell you, consider 5 organizational systems that pretty much determine the performance level and the character of an organization. 5 organizational systems that add up to the ecosystem within which we work. And there are 3 big ones and 2 little ones. The 3 big ones are structure and cross-boundary teamwork. That's one. Number 2, resource governance processes. That's planning and budgeting and demand management as well as accounting. Number 3, culture. Those are the 3 big ones. The minor ones are best practices that cut across the organization, and metrics and consequences, both performance management and dashboards.
Could you repeat the first one? Structure and...
Sorry?
The first one again was structure and
teamwork processes. You can't, cross-boundary teamwork, you can't separate those. Those are 2 sides of the same coin. If you change the org chart, you're going to change the way processes flow through the company. So any competent practitioner should advise you that the word structure includes 2 subsystems. The organization chart determines people's specialties, and then the walkthroughs, the prime and subs, The cross-boundary
Mm-hmm.
teamwork process puts those pieces back together into great teams. So what I want to your earlier point, each of these areas is based on science. With an org chart, for example, you don't just wing it. You don't want to define boxes around the personalities of incumbent leaders and have to restructure anytime anybody changes jobs. You don't want to add a new box for every new imperative that comes along or juggle things based on the problems of today. No, there are principles involved here, engineering principles. There's a framework of all the lines of business that exist within organizations and principles for assembling those lines of business into the organization chart. So it's the job of organizational effectiveness specialists to study that science of structure and be prepared to put together a process that's open and participative and to guide the leadership team in a principle-based design. So my point is, you are right. Organizational effectiveness is a profession in its own right. There is science here. There is study here. And if you don't have that talent in-house, then there are people outside that would be pleased to come in on a consulting basis, myself included, I guess, and teach and facilitate.
How do you prepare them for when they need to make a decision, like in the strategic planning retreat, where they need to now decide that they're going to capture this new capability that is possible to capture? They've now got to decide whether to invest in it, maybe spend X millions of dollars in order to build the organization. In other words, they're deciding whether or not to fund the OE function as a part of the strategy. Because almost all the strategic planning activities I've been a part of, they fail to think of this capability. They may think of it in the abstract, but when the heat comes, when the moment comes, they're going to put money in marketing and they're going to buy, innovate a new product, but they won't think of growing the organization the way you described so that it can accomplish great things. Is there any tips you could sort of share with us with respect to preparing for that?
I can make my argument that, just as with business strategy, those initiatives require funding. Mm-hmm. The same is true of organizational strategy. You can have a vision of an entrepreneurial organization, how those 5 systems work, but the initiatives to actually get from here to there take funding. And that is a highly leveraged investment. If you fund a strategy today, you get a strategy. If you fund organizational strategy, you get a whole organization that's driving strategic thinking now and into the future, a whole organization that's coming up with great ideas, a whole organization that's aligned to implement them. So the leverage is tremendous. The ROI is tremendous. Again, I believe organizational strategy is foundational to business strategy, and that should be the first step. That should be where your funding goes.
What's it like to work with a CEO who has these perspectives, this paradigm, these skills, and knows the 4 steps? Like they're it's a part of his or her MO. So they've learned this, and they now see this capacity as a tool for them to use, regardless of what's happening in the organization. They can always rely on their OE capability. What's it like to have a CEO who? Because I've seen CEOs who have a feeling that the organization could accomplish more, but they definitely don't have science. Yeah. What's it like to work with one who has, science, as you said?
Oh, it's terribly exciting. My observation is that there are 4 kinds of leaders out there. One is the cost cutter, come in, slash and burn, and get ejected within 2 years. That's not who we're talking about here. And that's not a time to implement transformation if that's what's going on. Number 2 is the project manager. Well, I'm here to implement a new ERP, or I'm here to implement digital business, or I'm here to get us into the Caribbean market. Well, a good leader would say, hey, I got people for that. That's kind of descending into the execution of strategies and not living at the strategic level. Third type of leader is the maintainer. Hey, the guy before me was pretty good, and all I've got to do is just marginal change, continuous improvement, little bits of change on the margin. Yawn. I don't know if that would be enough. I don't know. Is that going to get us there? I mean, there may be some organizations that are so well designed that that's all you need. And indeed, when you get to the end state, that's what you want. But that's not
Right.
transformation. The transformational leader is actually, Francis, I found pretty rare. But when you find one, it's really exciting. And when you find one that's studious, that's humble and studious, even better, because then they'll take the time to be thoughtful, the time to study the science, the time to engage leadership. And that's magic. That's what makes for truly great organizations.
Well, the thought I'm having is that our audience wants to work with someone like that.
I guess so. Well, here's what you can do. This is going to be blatantly self-serving. I'm warning you in advance. Here comes a plug for my
No
book.
problem.
I've written 8 books. The most recent is my capstone. It puts together all of my studies, structure, internal economy, culture, all of this business within a business stuff in one place. And it actually tells a story of what it's like to live in that kind of organization and how things actually get done, as well as an overview of the implementation processes. So the book is called How Organizations Should Work.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that an arrogant title?
It's a great one. But we understand where you're coming from. It makes sense.
Yeah, and it's my proposal. So, okay, it's not like I'm a know-it-all, but it's my proposal. Okay, so it describes that end state. How about this? How about if you hand a copy of the book to your CEO and just say, hey, what do you think? Is this the kind of organization that could really leverage our strategies? And okay, they're not going to read it, but I put Cliff's Notes at the back of the book. The glossy pages of the back, 30-page book summary built right in. So maybe they'll read the book summary, and maybe you can engage them in some discussion and then get them to read specific chapters as relevant. But somehow open up the dialogue. Open up the dialogue in the hope that they could kind of click and say, yeah, I want to be a transformational leader, not just a maintainer. What we're trying to do, let's say it this way, so many leaders work in the machine. And what we're trying to do is get our boss, get our C-level leaders to work on the machine, to step above the day-to-day, to step above being a cog in the machine, and become designers of the machine. And so I hope by presenting them with a little bit of reading, a little bit of vision, and reassuring them that there's a practical path forward, I'm hoping that many of them will step up.
Fantastic. Dean, how can folks hear more about you and get access to your book and learn more about, some of the thinking that you've done in this area? 8 books in the work that you've done.
Yeah, I would start with the capstone book, How Organizations Should Work. Once you've read the first book, the capstone book, How Organizations Should Work, reach out to me, email me. I love meeting people who are intrigued with these ideas, and we can brainstorm together what your next steps might be. So I hope I do hear from some members of your community, Francis.
Yeah, me too. I know, we may not admit to it readily, but we definitely need to have this in our tool belt. We can't approach organizations without thinking about their capabilities and what they could become if a transformation in their organization effectiveness were possible. It just makes us better doing what we do.
One of my clients, Sergio Pais in Guatemala, has been experienced, since we did the transformation, he's been experiencing reliable 30% growth in EBITDA year over year for about 10 years now. 30% reliably, some years 40.
That's what our clients are asking and looking for. Not less than that, actually, but yes, 30%. A bit though.
Year over year, every year. He's turning into a multinational company out of a small business. And what Sergio said to me was, my investment in transformation was the best investment I've ever made. I hope more C-level leaders come to understand that.
Change that sedan into a Formula One. So, Dean, thanks so much for joining us here at the Sustainable Strategic Planning Conference 2023. It's been a pleasure having you.